HeartfeltStories. Let's get into the story. Pascal Jonathan was a man of great ambition. As a rising businessman in Lagos, he had built his wealth through determination and hard work. But amidst all his success, he felt an emptiness that no amount of money could fill. One evening, after a long day at work, he stopped by a local bookstore in search of something to occupy his mind. That was when he saw her, Naomi. She was standing by a shelf, flipping through a book, her delicate fingers skimming the pages as her lips curled into a gentle smile. There was something about her presence that captivated him. She wasn't dressed in extravagant clothing like the women he often encountered in his social circle, but there was an elegance to her simplicity. Curious, Pascal walked toward her and pretended to look at a book beside her. "That must be an interesting read," he commented, glancing at her with a charming smile. Naomi looked up, a bit startled, then chuckled softly. "It is," she replied. "Books have a way of taking you to places you've never been." Pascal was intrigued by her response. Unlike the usual women who only spoke about fashion and wealth, Naomi had depth. They struck up a conversation, talking about literature, life, and ambitions. By the time Pascal left the bookstore, he knew one thing for sure: he had to see her again. For weeks, Pascal found excuses to visit the bookstore, hoping to run into Naomi. Their meetings became more frequent, and he learned more about her. Naomi was a teacher, passionate about molding young minds. She was kind, intelligent, and had a warm heart that made Pascal feel at peace. He admired her independence and strong values. She was different from the women who usually pursued him for his money. Pascal felt drawn to her in ways he hadn't felt before. One evening, after a long walk in the park, Pascal finally admitted to himself that he was falling for Naomi. He looked at her as they sat on a bench, the sunset casting a golden glow on her face. "Naomi, I think I've found something rare in you," he said sincerely. She smiled but didn't say a word. Pascal didn't need her to. He knew she felt it too. Pascal had always been a man who believed love was a distraction. To him, relationships were temporary, just fleeting moments of pleasure. But Naomi changed that. Her simplicity, intelligence, and genuine heart captivated him in ways he never expected. He found himself thinking about her all the time, waiting for the next moment he could hear her voice. Naomi's presence brought a warmth he hadn't known he needed. She was not like the women he had been with before. She didn't care about his wealth or influence. Instead, she challenged him, made him laugh, and saw him as a person rather than a businessman. The more Pascal spent time with Naomi, the deeper he fell. He loved the way she spoke about her students with passion, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her dreams. He wanted to be the man who made those dreams come true. She made him realize that life wasn't just about making money but about finding joy in the small, meaningful moments. He had never met a woman like her, and for the first time in his life, he wanted something permanent. One evening, Pascal took Naomi out for dinner at a quiet, candlelit restaurant. The setting was intimate, the air thick with an unspoken connection between them. As she laughed at one of his jokes, Pascal reached for her hand, his gaze locking onto hers. "Naomi, I don't think I've ever felt this way about anyone before," he confessed. Naomi's smile softened. "Feel what way?" she asked, teasing. Pascal exhaled. "Like I've finally found something real." Naomi blushed, looking away, but Pascal gently lifted her chin. "I'm serious. I think I'm falling in love with you." Naomi's heart pounded. She had feelings for Pascal too, but she had been cautious. He was a wealthy man, used to a different lifestyle. Could he truly love someone like her? But looking into his eyes, she saw sincerity. "I feel the same way," she whispered. Pascal smiled, relief and happiness washing over him. That night, he knew Naomi was the woman he wanted to spend forever with. Pascal had never been the type to hesitate when he wanted something, and Naomi was no exception. He knew she was the one. He spent weeks planning the perfect proposal, making sure everything was just right. He wanted to show her how much she meant to him, how serious he was about their future. Naomi deserved nothing but the best. One evening, Pascal invited Naomi to his private beach house under the pretense of a simple dinner. When she arrived, she was stunned to see a beautifully arranged setup, candles, rose petals, and a violinist playing soft music in the background. Naomi's heart pounded as Pascal led her toward a spot overlooking the ocean. She had a feeling something special was about to happen. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Pascal took a deep breath, then got down on one knee. Naomi gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Naomi," Pascal began, his voice filled with emotion. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. I never believed in love until I met you. You changed me, made me want more out of life. I don't just want to be with you, I need you. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Naomi's eyes. She had never imagined such a grand proposal, but what mattered most was the love she saw in Pascal's eyes. She nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. "Yes," she finally whispered. Pascal slid the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a deep embrace. That night, under the stars, their love story took its next big step. The engagement brought Naomi overwhelming joy, but it also introduced her to Pascal's world, one of wealth, expectations, and scrutiny. Pascal was excited about their wedding, wanting to make it the biggest event of the year. He hired the best wedding planner, booked a luxury venue, and ensured the guest list was filled with influential people. But for Naomi, it was all too much. She had always dreamed of a simple, intimate wedding surrounded by loved ones, but Pascal's vision was extravagant. "Pascal, we don't need something this grand," she tried to reason one evening as they reviewed plans. "I just want to marry you, that's all that matters." Pascal kissed her forehead. "I understand, but I want to give you the best. You deserve it." Naomi sighed, agreeing despite her hesitation. As the wedding preparations continued, Naomi started to notice something unsettling: whispers among Pascal's friends, judging glances from his business associates, and most of all, Pascal's mother's cold attitude toward her. She knew some people believed she wasn't good enough for Pascal, but he reassured her. "None of them matter. You're my future," he told her. And Naomi chose to believe him. Despite the challenges, she held on to the excitement of becoming Pascal's wife. She told herself that once the wedding was over, they would settle into a quiet, happy life together. She didn't know that fate had other plans. With each passing day, Naomi envisioned a beautiful future with Pascal. She saw them building a home filled with laughter, love, and perhaps one day, children. She imagined waking up next to him every morning, sharing their dreams, growing old together. Every doubt and fear she had faded in the presence of his love. She focused on the wedding preparations, despite the overwhelming pressure. She wanted to be the perfect bride, the perfect wife. Even when Pascal's mother subtly criticized her, or when Pascal became too busy with work to discuss wedding details, she ignored it. Love would conquer all, she told herself. The night before the wedding, Naomi stood in front of a mirror, looking at the white gown she would wear the next day. She smiled, feeling her heart swell with happiness. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Pascal Jonathan. But deep down, a quiet fear lingered. Something felt off. She pushed the feeling away, telling herself she was just nervous. If only she had listened to that small voice inside her, she might have been prepared for what was coming. The sun shone brightly on the morning of Pascal and Naomi's wedding. Everything had been meticulously planned. The grand ballroom was decorated with thousands of white roses, the chandeliers sparkled like diamonds, and the air smelled of fresh lavender. It was a day of luxury, a wedding fit for royalty. Naomi, standing in her dressing room, stared at her reflection in the mirror. She looked beautiful in her custom-made gown, but deep down, something unsettled her. Was it nerves? Or was it the lingering feeling that something was changing between her and Pascal? As she walked down the aisle, her heart pounded, not just from excitement, but from an unshakable anxiety. Pascal stood at the altar, looking as handsome as ever in his tailored suit, but there was something different in his eyes, something she couldn't place. When she reached him, he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Naomi swallowed her doubts, reminding herself that today was about love, about forever. The vows were exchanged, and cheers erupted as Pascal kissed his new bride. Naomi wanted to believe that the kiss was filled with love, but in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. The reception was lively, with guests laughing and toasting to their union, but Naomi noticed Pascal getting lost in conversations with his business associates. She sat alone for most of the night, watching as he entertained everyone but her. It was the happiest day of her life, yet something felt incomplete. That night, as they entered their honeymoon suite, Pascal was distant. He was affectionate, yes, but there was a slight hesitation in his touch. Naomi brushed it off as exhaustion from a long day. Little did she know, the cracks in their fairy tale had already begun to form. For the first few months of their marriage, Pascal did everything to make Naomi feel like a queen. He spoiled her with expensive jewelry, luxury vacations, and designer dresses. Naomi loved the attention and the care, but what she truly wanted was more of him, more of his time, his affection, his presence. Pascal, however, had become busier than ever. He was always on calls, flying to meetings, and attending lavish parties with wealthy investors. Naomi tried to be understanding. After all, she had married a businessman, and success came with responsibilities. She told herself that this was just a phase and that things would get better. Whenever Pascal noticed her disappointment, he would compensate with extravagant gifts. "I got you something special," he would say, presenting a diamond necklace or a designer handbag. Naomi would smile, thanking him, but deep down, all she wanted was a simple dinner at home with him, just talking and laughing like they used to. Their love still existed, but it was beginning to change. Naomi tried to hold on, believing that this was just the normal adjustment phase of marriage. But the truth was, Pascal was beginning to feel something he couldn't ignore, doubt. Pascal couldn't explain it, but something felt off in his marriage. He still loved Naomi, or at least he thought he did, but there was a nagging feeling inside him, a sense of restlessness. At first, he blamed it on work stress, but as time passed, he realized it had nothing to do with business. It had everything to do with his feelings toward Naomi. He started noticing little things, how different their worlds were, how she didn't quite fit into the high society he was used to. When he took her to events, he sometimes felt embarrassed by her simplicity. She didn't have the polished charm that the women in his circle had. She was kind, gentle, and soft-spoken, but was that enough? He hated himself for thinking this way. Naomi had done nothing wrong, she was the same woman he had fallen in love with. But his mind wandered to the possibilities of what life could be like with someone more suited to his lifestyle. He began staying out later, making excuses for why he couldn't make it home for dinner. Naomi noticed, but she never accused him of anything. She simply smiled, kissed him good night, and hoped things would get better. But Pascal wasn't sure anymore. And that scared him. Naomi wasn't blind. She saw the changes in Pascal, how he barely looked at her the same way, how he seemed uninterested in conversations they used to enjoy, how he preferred being anywhere but home. But she refused to give up. She had made a vow, and she intended to keep it. She started making extra efforts, cooking his favorite meals, planning surprise dates, dressing in the outfits he used to love. But no matter what she did, Pascal remained distant. Some nights, he barely spoke to her, only muttering a tired good night before turning his back to her in bed. One evening, Naomi confronted him. "Pascal, is something wrong? Have I done something to upset you?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "No, Naomi. I'm just tired, that's all." But Naomi knew it was more than that. She wanted to ask if he still loved her, but she was afraid of the answer. So she held on to hope, believing that this was just a rough patch in their marriage. She told herself that love was stronger than doubt, that if she just remained patient, things would go back to the way they were. But what she didn't know was that Pascal had already begun seeking something else, someone else. It started as a business connection. Pamela was one of the investors at an exclusive event Pascal attended. She was beautiful, confident, and sophisticated, the kind of woman who knew how to command attention in a room full of powerful men. She was everything Naomi wasn't. At first, Pascal didn't think much of her, but their conversation flowed effortlessly. She understood the business world in ways Naomi never could. She was ambitious, witty, and bold. They exchanged numbers for professional reasons, but soon, their conversations became more personal. Pamela knew he was married, but she didn't care. She flirted shamelessly, dropping hints that made Pascal feel desired in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. She was exciting, unpredictable, and different from the quiet, gentle wife he had at home. That night, as he drove home, Pascal thought about Naomi waiting for him. He knew what he was feeling was wrong, but for the first time since his wedding, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a spark. And that was dangerous. Pascal had never intended to fall for another woman, but Pamela was intoxicating. She had an air of confidence and sophistication that Naomi lacked, and she made him feel powerful and desired. Their meetings, which started as professional discussions, turned into flirtatious exchanges, and before he realized it, he was looking forward to seeing her more than he was to going home. Pamela knew exactly what she was doing, playing the game of seduction effortlessly. One evening, after a late-night business dinner, Pamela leaned in closer than necessary, her perfume wrapping around Pascal like a spell. "You deserve more, Pascal," she whispered, her fingers grazing his hand. "A man like you shouldn't have to settle." Her words planted a seed in his mind, and from that moment, his heart started shifting away from Naomi. Pascal started making excuses to be around Pamela, staying late at work or scheduling unnecessary meetings. Naomi noticed the shift, but every time she asked, he brushed her off with a lie. "It's just business," he would say. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. The guilt gnawed at him, but it was overshadowed by the thrill of something new and forbidden. One night, he finally gave in. It was raining when he walked Pamela to her car, but instead of saying goodnight, she pulled him close and kissed him. Pascal didn't resist. That night marked the beginning of his betrayal, the start of his downfall. As Pascal's feelings for Pamela deepened, his patience for Naomi wore thin. Everything about her began to irritate him, her kindness, her simplicity, the way she always looked at him with hope. The guilt he felt for his affair with Pamela turned into resentment, and he started lashing out. At first, it was just words, cold remarks, dismissive responses, and silent treatment. Naomi tried to make things better, but Pascal made it clear he no longer cared. "You're suffocating me," he snapped one evening when she asked why he barely touched her anymore. Naomi swallowed her tears and tried to be stronger, believing this was just a phase. Then, the verbal abuse turned physical. It started with a shove during an argument, then a slap when she questioned his whereabouts. Each time, Pascal blamed her. "You make me angry," he would say. "If you just listened, this wouldn't happen." Naomi began walking on eggshells around him, desperate to keep the peace. She told herself she could endure it, that the man she loved was still in there somewhere. But deep down, a small voice whispered the truth: this wasn't love anymore. It was destruction. Pascal sat in his office, staring blankly at the documents on his desk. His mind was far from work, it was tangled in thoughts of his marriage, thoughts he could no longer ignore. His love for Naomi had faded, replaced by frustration and resentment. He told himself it wasn't his fault, she had failed him by not giving him a child, by not being the woman he needed. More and more, he found himself drawn to Pamela, who made him feel alive in ways Naomi never could. The idea of a new life with her had planted itself in his mind, and now, it refused to leave. For weeks, he had toyed with the thought of divorce. It started as a quiet whisper in his mind, but now, it was an unavoidable reality. He no longer wanted to be tied to Naomi, no longer wanted to wake up to her presence, no longer wanted to endure the sight of her hopeful eyes searching for the love he no longer felt. He imagined what life would be like without her, a fresh start, a chance to be with someone who excited him, someone who wasn't a constant reminder of disappointment. But he wasn't ready to tell Naomi yet. Not yet. Instead, he distanced himself even more. He came home late, avoided conversations, and acted as though Naomi barely existed. He watched as confusion and sadness clouded her face, but he felt no remorse. This was necessary, he told himself. He wanted her to get used to his absence, to feel his growing detachment. If she suffered now, it would make things easier when the time finally came. Pamela, too, had started planting the idea in his head, telling him he deserved a woman who could give him everything he wanted. "Why hold on to something that isn't working?" she had asked one evening, her voice soft but insistent. "You need to think about your happiness, Pascal." As he sat there, lost in thought, he knew it was only a matter of time. He would leave Naomi. He would walk away and never look back. But for now, he remained silent, letting the plan take shape in his mind. He wasn't ready to break the news yet, but when he did, he would make sure there was no turning back. Naomi had no idea that her world was about to change forever. Pamela knew that she had Pascal wrapped around her finger, But she also knew that as long as Naomi remained his wife, she could never fully claim him. She had spent months subtly influencing him, making him see Naomi as a burden rather than a partner. Every time Pascal hesitated, showing even the slightest guilt about leaving his wife, Pamela was there to remind him why Naomi was no longer good enough. "She can't give you what you need, Pascal," she whispered as she ran her fingers down his arm. "Why are you still holding on?" The words sank deep into Pascal's mind, feeding the resentment that had already begun to fester. Every time Naomi tried to talk to him, every time she looked at him with those pleading eyes, all he could hear was Pamela's voice telling him that he deserved better. Pamela painted Naomi as weak, as a failure, as someone unworthy of a man like him. She reminded him of the countless nights Naomi had cried, begging for his affection, and twisted it into an act of desperation. "You don't need a woman who begs for your love," Pamela scoffed one evening. "You need a woman who excites you, who makes you feel like a man." Slowly but surely, Pascal's patience with Naomi ran dry. He no longer cared if she cooked his favorite meals, no longer cared if she waited up for him late at night. He began to see her as nothing more than an obstacle, a roadblock to the happiness he believed Pamela could give him. The way Pamela spoke about Naomi made him feel justified in his growing hatred. "She's not even a real woman," Pamela sneered one night. "A real woman gives her man an heir. What has she given you?" "Nothing." Those words echoed in his mind for days, and with every passing moment, his resolve to leave Naomi strengthened. Still, he hadn't told Naomi. He wasn't quite ready yet. But every time Pamela curled into his arms, every time she pressed her lips to his, she whispered promises of a new life together. "Get rid of her," she urged, her voice intoxicating. "Then we can finally be free." Pascal clenched his jaw, knowing that soon, he would do just that. The love he once felt for Naomi had turned to dust, and all that remained was a cold, hard certainty: she had to go. The moment had finally come. Pascal arrived home early that evening, his expression unreadable as he stepped into the house he once cherished. Naomi looked up from where she sat on the couch, surprise flickering in her eyes. He never came home early anymore. For a brief second, a hopeful smile touched her lips, but it quickly faded when she saw the cold, detached look in his eyes. "Pascal," she asked cautiously, rising to her feet. Without a word, he pulled a thick envelope from his coat and tossed it onto the coffee table. Naomi stared at it, confusion knotting her brows. "What is this?" she whispered. "Divorce papers," Pascal said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. The words sent a jolt through Naomi's chest, her breath catching in her throat. She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign that this was some cruel joke, but all she found was indifference. "Sign them," he continued. "I want you out of this house by tomorrow." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes as she shook her head in disbelief. "Pascal, why are you doing this?" "What did I do wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. But he didn't answer her. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with her heart shattering into a million pieces. Naomi stood outside the house she had once called home, gripping the small suitcase that held the only belongings Pascal had allowed her to take. The night air was bitterly cold, matching the emptiness inside her. She stared at the heavy doors of the mansion, hoping, praying, that Pascal would come back and tell her this was all a mistake. But deep down, she knew he wouldn't. He had thrown her out without a second thought, as if the years they had spent together meant nothing. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. There was no time to cry. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Her parents had long since passed away, and the few friends she once had distanced themselves when her marriage began crumbling. She was utterly alone. Clutching her suitcase tighter, she walked aimlessly through the streets, unsure of where she was going. Each step felt heavier than the last, exhaustion creeping into her bones. She had always thought that love would protect her, that marriage was supposed to be her safe haven. But here she was, homeless, abandoned, and with no idea of what to do next. The streets were unkind to a woman with nowhere to go. The city, once so full of life and promise, now felt like a cruel maze she couldn't escape. She wandered for hours, her stomach growling in protest, her body aching from the cold. She saw people passing by, some sparing her a curious glance, others ignoring her entirely. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be invisible. When she finally found a small bench at the edge of a park, she sank onto it, curling into herself for warmth. The night stretched on endlessly, each minute dragging by like an eternity. As the first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, Naomi realized she couldn't keep wandering aimlessly. She needed to find shelter, food, anything to survive. But where could she go? She had no money, no job, and no one to help her. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, not just from the cold but from the terrifying uncertainty of her future. She had lost everything in one night, and now she had to figure out how to start over from nothing. Inside the grand mansion that Naomi had once called home, laughter and music filled the air. Pascal sat at the dining table, a glass of expensive wine in his hand, while Pamela leaned against him, a smug smile on her face. The house, which had once felt warm and filled with love, now radiated a different kind of energy, one of indulgence and selfish pleasure. Pascal had convinced himself that he had made the right decision. With Naomi gone, he was finally free to be with the woman he believed he truly loved. Pamela, basking in her newfound position as Pascal's woman, took full advantage of the luxuries surrounding her. She wasted no time in redecorating the house, erasing any trace of Naomi's presence. New furniture arrived daily, expensive jewelry adorned her body, and she ensured that Pascal's wealth was at her disposal. She had won, or so she thought. But deep inside, Pascal felt a strange emptiness. He couldn't quite place it, but no matter how much he drank or how much he showered Pamela with gifts, something felt off. He dismissed it as stress, convincing himself that in time, he would feel the happiness he had been chasing. Days turned into weeks, and Pascal buried himself in his work and lavish lifestyle, while Pamela indulged in luxury. They hosted extravagant parties, entertaining Pascal's business associates and wealthy friends. Pamela enjoyed the attention, flirting effortlessly and ensuring she was the center of it all. She had Pascal wrapped around her finger, or at least that's what she believed. Meanwhile, Pascal continued pushing aside the nagging voice in his head, the one that whispered that something was missing. He refused to acknowledge the possibility that, despite everything, he might have made a mistake. But even amidst the celebrations, a storm was brewing. Unbeknownst to Pascal, Pamela's desires ran deeper than just wealth. She was never the type to settle for one man, not when there were richer, more powerful men out there. As Pascal toasted to his newfound happiness, Pamela was already beginning to tire of him. The celebration he was enjoying was merely a facade, one that wouldn't last forever. The streets of the city were bustling with life, but for Naomi, it felt like she was moving through a world that no longer recognized her. She had been wandering aimlessly for days, surviving on scraps and the occasional kindness of strangers. Her once glowing skin now looked dull, her clothes were wrinkled and stained from sleeping on benches and abandoned corners. Every step she took was heavy, her body weak from hunger, but she refused to break down. She had already lost everything, her home, her marriage, her dignity. She couldn't afford to lose hope too. As she walked past busy storefronts, her eyes darted toward the glass windows displaying mannequins dressed in elegant outfits, a cruel reminder of the life she once had. Her reflection in the glass startled her, she barely recognized herself. Her once neatly styled hair was disheveled, her once soft, delicate hands now rough from sleeping on hard surfaces. Swallowing the lump in her throat, she kept moving, forcing herself not to dwell on the past. She needed to find a way to survive, to rebuild, no matter how difficult it seemed. Then, as she turned a corner, she saw a small restaurant with a faded sign that read "Help Wanted, Waitress Needed." Naomi stopped in her tracks, staring at the sign as if it were a lifeline. Her heart pounded in her chest. This could be her chance. But then doubt crept in, would they even hire her? She had no experience, no resume, and no proper appearance to make a good first impression. She was once a wife, a woman who had never worked for a living. How was she supposed to handle customers, take orders, and carry trays? Despite her doubts, Naomi knew she couldn't afford to hesitate. She had nowhere else to go, no other options left. Taking a deep breath, she wiped her sweaty palms on her dress, straightened her back, and prepared to step inside. But just as she reached for the door, something held her back, a sudden wave of fear. What if they rejected her? What if she wasn't capable of doing this? The weight of her past and her uncertain future crashed over her, making her freeze in place. Instead of walking in, she took a step back, turning away from the restaurant. She wasn't ready yet. But deep down, she knew she had to be. Because if she didn't take this chance soon, she might not get another. After days of wandering the streets with no real direction, Naomi finally summoned the courage to step into the small restaurant where she had seen the help wanted sign. Her stomach twisted with nerves as she pushed open the heavy wooden door, stepping inside a warm space filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread and sizzling meals. The sight of customers chatting over steaming plates of food made her stomach grumble, reminding her that she hadn't eaten properly in days. But she wasn't here for food, she was here for survival. A woman in her mid-50s stood behind the counter, wiping her hands on a towel. She had a stern yet kind face, her gray-streaked hair tied in a bun. Naomi hesitated before clearing her throat. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman glanced up, looking Naomi over with an unreadable expression. "Yes? Can I help you?" she asked, her voice brisk. Naomi swallowed hard. "I saw the sign outside. I was wondering if you're still hiring for the waitress position." The woman studied her for a moment before nodding. "We are. Do you have any experience?" Naomi bit her lip, shaking her head. "No, ma'am, but I'm a fast learner. I can work hard. I really need this job." The desperation in her voice was undeniable, and for a moment, Naomi feared the woman would turn her away. Instead, the woman sighed. "We usually prefer someone with experience, but we're short-staffed." "What's your name?" "Naomi," she answered quickly. "All right, Naomi. My name is Mrs. Taylor. Come back tomorrow morning for a trial shift. If you can keep up, the job is yours." Relief flooded Naomi's body, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. She thanked Mrs. Taylor repeatedly before leaving the restaurant, her heart still hammering. It wasn't a glamorous job, and she had no idea how difficult it would be, but it was something. A way to earn a living. As she walked away, she found herself whispering a silent prayer of gratitude. For the first time in a long time, she had a reason to believe things might finally be looking up. The next morning, Naomi arrived at the restaurant just before sunrise. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with anxiety about whether she would be able to handle the job. She had washed her dress as best as she could in a public restroom, and though it was still worn and slightly damp, she straightened it and walked inside with as much confidence as she could muster. Mrs. Taylor was already there, setting up tables. "You're early," she noted, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, ma'am. I wanted to make a good impression," Naomi said, forcing a smile. Mrs. Taylor nodded approvingly. "Good. You'll be shadowing another waitress today. Watch closely, learn fast, and don't drop anything." Naomi followed the lead waitress, a young woman named Lisa, who showed her how to take orders, carry trays, and balance multiple tasks at once. It was harder than she expected. The restaurant quickly became busy, and Naomi struggled to keep up, nearly dropping a tray of drinks at one point. By midday, her feet ached, and her arms felt sore from carrying heavy trays, but she refused to give up. Every time she felt like breaking down, she reminded herself that she had no other options. This job was all she had. At the end of her shift, she waited anxiously for Mrs. Taylor's verdict. The older woman studied her carefully before saying, "You have a lot to learn, but you worked hard today. You can start officially tomorrow." Tears pricked Naomi's eyes as she nodded. "Thank you. Thank you so much." For the first time in weeks, she had a steady income, a chance to rebuild her life. As she walked out of the restaurant, exhaustion weighed her down, but so did a sense of newfound determination. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was fighting to take control of her future. Naomi had been feeling unwell for days, but she kept pushing through, convincing herself it was just exhaustion from her long shifts at the restaurant. She had been working tirelessly, barely resting, and eating irregularly. The dizziness, nausea, and sudden fatigue all seemed like signs of stress, at least, that's what she told herself. But when she realized she had missed her period, a small seed of worry took root in her mind. Could it be something more? One evening, after another exhausting shift, she found herself walking past a pharmacy. She hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. Her hands trembled as she picked up a pregnancy test, trying to ignore the nervous energy swirling in her chest. She quickly paid for it and left, stuffing the small box deep into her bag. This couldn't be happening. She told herself she was just overthinking, but deep down, fear gnawed at her. Back in her tiny rented room, Naomi sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the test in her hand. The silence around her was deafening. Finally, she took a deep breath and followed the instructions, her heart pounding with each second that passed. When the result appeared, her whole world tilted. 2 bold lines. Positive. Naomi felt the air leave her lungs. She clutched the test in disbelief, her hands shaking. A baby? Now? Tears welled in her eyes, a mix of fear, confusion, and overwhelming emotion. She was pregnant with Pascal's child, yet she was all alone. The man she once loved had discarded her like she was nothing, and now she carried his baby inside her. What was she going to do? Naomi curled up on the bed, holding her stomach protectively. This child had no father, and she had no stable home or financial security. How would she survive? For the first time in a long while, she truly felt lost. Naomi sat on the small bed in her rented room, staring at the cracked ceiling. Her hands instinctively rested on her stomach as reality weighed down on her. She was pregnant. The moment she had always prayed for had finally come, but instead of joy, all she felt was fear. How was she going to raise a child alone? She barely made enough money to cover her rent and meals, and now she had to think about medical checkups, baby supplies, and the challenges of pregnancy while working long hours at the restaurant. At work, she forced a smile as she carried heavy trays of food, her body already beginning to feel the strain. The smell of grilled meat made her nauseous, and she had to excuse herself several times to breathe. The manager had already warned her once about being too slow. If he found out she was pregnant, would he fire her? She couldn't afford to lose this job. Every tip she earned went straight into her savings, money she knew she would soon need for hospital visits and baby supplies. At night, the worries refused to let her sleep. She ran through possible solutions in her mind. Should she tell her boss? Would he understand? Or should she work until she couldn't hide it anymore? The thought of being jobless terrified her. Going back to Pascal was not an option. She had seen the way he looked at her before throwing her out. He didn't love her, and he certainly wouldn't care about this baby. Pamela had made sure of that. Naomi had no one but herself now. One evening, as she was clearing tables, she overheard a conversation between 2 customers discussing free medical aid for pregnant women in the city. Her heart raced as she carefully listened in. Maybe there was hope after all. She quickly jotted down the name of the clinic they mentioned. It was a long shot, but she had to try. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for her child. Naomi had just finished a long shift at the restaurant. Her feet ached, and her body felt drained from the weight of her worries. The air outside was cool, a contrast to the stuffy heat inside the small eatery where she worked. She sighed as she made her way toward a nearby bar, not to drink, but simply to sit for a while and clear her mind. She had been feeling weaker lately, and though she tried to push through, she knew she couldn't ignore it much longer. As she sat at the corner of the bar, sipping a glass of water, she didn't notice the man observing her from across the room. Daniel had been watching her for a while, intrigued by the sadness in her eyes. He was a billionaire, used to seeing people put on facades of happiness around him, but Naomi wasn't pretending. There was a quiet strength about her, yet her exhaustion was evident. Something about her drew him in, and without thinking twice, he approached her. "Rough night?" he asked, his deep voice breaking her thoughts. Naomi looked up, startled by the stranger's presence. He was well-dressed, with an air of confidence that suggested wealth, but his eyes were kind. "You look like you have a lot on your mind," he continued, taking a seat across from her. Naomi hesitated. She wasn't used to strangers showing concern. But something about Daniel made her feel safe, even though she didn't know why. Maybe it was the warmth in his tone or the way he seemed genuinely interested. Before she knew it, the words spilled out. "I'm pregnant. And I have no idea how I'm going to take care of this child." Daniel listened intently as Naomi spoke. She told him everything, about her marriage to Pascal, how he had thrown her out, and how she had been struggling to survive ever since. Her voice didn't waver, but Daniel could see the pain behind her words. He had met many women in his life, but none had ever captivated him the way she did. There was something incredibly strong and resilient about her. I don't know why I'm telling you all this, Naomi admitted, shaking her head. I guess I just needed someone to listen. Daniel smiled. Sometimes, that's all we need. He leaned forward, his expression sincere. You don't have to go through this alone. I can help you. Naomi blinked, caught off guard by his offer. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Daniel shrugged. Because I want to. Because I believe that no woman should have to suffer for something she didn't deserve. And because. He hesitated, then decided to be honest. Because I think you're incredible, Naomi. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had never expected kindness from a stranger, let alone a man like him. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she had never seen in Pascal, genuine care. Meanwhile, Pascal was beginning to sense that things were not as perfect as they had seemed with Pamela. He had thrown Naomi out believing that Pamela was the perfect woman for him, but lately, things felt different. The excitement of their relationship was fading, and Pamela had started acting distant. One evening, while Pascal was at a business dinner, a colleague leaned over and whispered, I heard some things about your woman, Pamela. Pascal frowned. What things? The man hesitated before speaking. She's been seen around town with another man. Not just once or twice, but frequently. Pascal's stomach twisted. At first, he dismissed it. Pamela would never do that to him, would she? But as the days passed, more whispers followed. Even his driver mentioned seeing Pamela with someone else. The seed of doubt grew, and soon, Pascal found himself watching her every move. Pascal had never been the type of man to doubt himself. But as the suspicions piled up, he knew he had to find out the truth. One evening, he decided to follow Pamela. He waited in his car, watching as she left their home dressed in a way she never did for him anymore. His heart pounded as he tailed her to an upscale hotel. He parked and followed her inside, keeping a safe distance. And then he saw it, Pamela, laughing in the arms of another man. She kissed him, whispered in his ear, and held onto him the way she used to hold Pascal. Rage bubbled inside him. He stormed toward them, his voice thundering. Pamela! She turned, eyes wide with shock, but there was no guilt in them, only annoyance. Pascal, what are you doing here? What am I doing here? He repeated, his voice shaking. What the hell are you doing? Pamela scoffed. Oh, don't act so surprised, Pascal. You thought I loved you? You were just a stepping stone. She turned back to her lover, dismissing Pascal like he was nothing. For the first time, Pascal understood what true betrayal felt like. The months of struggle, fear, and uncertainty led to this very moment. Naomi was in the hospital, clutching the bedsheets as waves of pain crashed through her. She had no family to hold her hand, no husband to support her through the agony of childbirth. But she was not alone. Daniel was there, his strong hands holding hers, whispering words of encouragement as she fought to bring her child into the world. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of a baby's cry filled the air. Naomi's body relaxed with relief as the nurse gently placed the newborn in her arms. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the tiny, perfect face staring back at her. His dark eyes held a strength she recognized, a reminder that no matter what, she had to keep fighting for him. She turned to Daniel, who was watching them with nothing but warmth and admiration. His name will be Desmond, she whispered, brushing her fingers against her son's soft cheek. Daniel smiled, his voice low and filled with emotion. That's a strong name for a strong boy. He gently touched the baby's hand, feeling a sense of protectiveness take over him. Naomi wasn't just a woman he had helped, she had become someone he cared for deeply. Watching her with Desmond, he knew he would do anything to protect them. Time passed, and Naomi's life took on a new rhythm. She had fully embraced motherhood, finding joy in every moment she spent with Desmond. With Daniel's unwavering support, she was no longer the frightened woman who had been thrown out into the streets. She had found her strength again, and this time, no one would take it from her. One day, as she stood in the airport waiting for her flight to a new city, a familiar voice called her name. She froze, her heart pounding as she slowly turned around. Pascal. Her former husband stood there, shock written all over his face as his eyes locked onto Desmond. The baby, comfortably nestled in Naomi's arms, cooed softly, unaware of the man staring at him with wide eyes. "That's my child," Pascal said, his voice thick with disbelief. Naomi held Desmond closer. "He was," she said firmly. "But not anymore." Pascal's chest tightened as regret crashed over him like a wave. He had thrown away something precious without even realizing it. Now, standing before Naomi and their son, he saw everything he had lost. Pascal followed Naomi outside, desperate to make her listen. "Naomi, please. I made a mistake. I should have never left you. I didn't know what I had until it was gone." His voice cracked with sincerity. "Give me another chance, to be a father to Desmond, to fix what I broke." Naomi exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "Pascal, you didn't just leave me. You destroyed me. You chose Pamela over me, you threw me out with nothing, and now that she betrayed you, you suddenly want me back?" Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough over this man. "I'll do anything," Pascal begged. "I swear, I'll take care of you and the baby. We can be a family again." But Naomi stood firm. "I already have a family. Daniel has been there for me when you weren't. He's the one who cared for me when I had no one. He's the man Desmond will look up to." She held Pascal's gaze, her next words cutting like a blade. "You are nothing to us now." Pascal watched helplessly as Naomi turned away, walking toward a new life that had no place for him. For the first time, he realized that some mistakes could never be undone. Naomi's life took a turn she never expected, but it was the best thing that had ever happened to her. With Daniel by her side, she no longer had to fear the future. He had been her rock, standing beside her through the darkest times, and now, he was the man she loved. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their new home, watching Desmond sleep, Daniel took Naomi's hand in his. "I want us to be more than just two people raising a child together," he said softly. "I love you, Naomi. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Tears welled up in Naomi's eyes, but this time, they were tears of happiness. She had spent so long suffering, wondering if she would ever find peace again. And now, here was a man who had shown her what real love meant. "Yes," she whispered, smiling through her tears. "I would love that." As Daniel pulled her into his arms, Naomi finally felt it, the happiness she had always dreamed of. The sun set beautifully over the horizon as Naomi stood by the balcony, watching little Desmond play in the garden with Daniel. The past few years had been a roller coaster of pain, betrayal, and redemption, but now, as she took in the peaceful scene before her, she knew she had finally found her happiness. Desmond was growing up in a home filled with love, something she once feared she could never give him. Daniel had proven time and time again that he was more than just a friend. He was the man who had stepped up when the world turned its back on her. Pascal had tried to reach out a few more times, but Naomi had made it clear that she had moved on. She wasn't bitter anymore. She had let go of the anger and resentment, not for his sake, but for her own peace of mind. Pascal had lost the privilege of being in her life, and she had no regrets about shutting that door. The last she heard, he was struggling to rebuild himself after losing everything to Pamela's deceit. But that was no longer her concern. Naomi's journey had been one of resilience. From the moment she was thrown out with nowhere to go, to working tirelessly as a waitress while carrying Desmond, she had fought for every bit of stability she now enjoyed. There had been days when she thought she wouldn't make it, but with Daniel's encouragement and her own determination, she had built a new life for herself. She had even gone back to school and earned a degree in business management, something she had always dreamed of. With her qualifications and experience, Naomi had managed to open a small restaurant, which quickly gained popularity. People loved her food and admired her story. Her once broken life had turned into an inspiration for many struggling women who thought they had no way out. She had proven that no matter how hard life knocked her down, she could rise again, stronger than before. Daniel had been her biggest supporter throughout it all. He had not only stood by her, but he had also helped raise Desmond as his own. Watching Daniel and Desmond together filled Naomi's heart with gratitude. Daniel had proposed to her a year after Desmond was born, and though she had hesitated at first, fearing love would betray her again, she eventually said yes. They had a small but beautiful wedding, surrounded by the few friends and well-wishers who had supported her through her darkest times. Now, as she looked at the life she had built, she felt nothing but peace. She walked down to the garden, where Daniel scooped Desmond into his arms, making him giggle. Naomi smiled, wrapping her arms around them both, knowing that this was what true happiness felt like: a home, a family, and love that was genuine and unwavering. For the first time in her life, Naomi wasn't looking back with regret or pain. She was looking ahead, knowing that no matter what challenges came, she would face them with strength. She had already survived the worst, and now, she was finally living the life she deserved. That's the end of the story. What did you learn about the story? Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. Thanks for watching.